When you think of the Roman Empire, what comes to mind? Gladiators? The Colosseum? Those famous legions marching across Europe? Well, here's what historians won't tell you right away. The real secret to Rome's 1,000-year dominance wasn't one on land at all. It was one beneath the waves, in harbours you've probably never heard of, using technology so advanced that modern engineers are still studying it today. And the craziest part? We're only now discovering exactly how they did it. Today, on Untold Realms, we're diving deep into the submerged world of the Roman Empire, uncovering engineering marvels that rival anything we build today. If you love history, mysteries, and incredible discoveries that challenge everything you thought you knew, you're in the right place. So please hit that like button, subscribe to Untold Realms, and turn on notifications because we upload mind-blowing historical content weekly. Now let's drain the oceans and see what the Romans left behind. Imagine this. It's the 1st century AD, and Rome isn't just a city anymore. It's the world's first superpower. But here's the problem that nobody talks about. Rome's population has exploded to 1 million people. 1 million. That's larger than any city the world has ever seen. And every single one of those people needs to eat. We're talking about between 150 to 300 million tons of grain annually. That's an almost incomprehensible amount of food. Now, Rome could grow some of that grain, sure, but not enough, not nearly enough. So where does all this food come from? Egypt, North Africa, Sicily, ports scattered across the empire. But here's where it gets complicated. These regions are hundreds of miles away across the Mediterranean. Getting that grain from distant provinces to Rome should have been impossible. It should have broken the empire's back financially and logistically. But it didn't. Why? Because the Romans engineered something so sophisticated that it became the backbone of their entire civilization. They built a maritime supply network that was literally unprecedented in human history. Fast forward to modern times. Archaeologists face a massive puzzle. Historical texts written by ancient historians like Livy describe an incredible port. They call it Portus. The historians tell us it was built by Emperor Claudius around 46 AD and massively expanded by Emperor Trajan 60 years later. They describe it as a port without equal, massive hexagonal basins, warehouses that could store months of grain. But here's the mystery. Nobody could find it. For over a century, investigators searched. They knew it had to exist because historical records were very specific about its magnificence. But Portus had simply vanished. Or had it? In the 2000s, archaeologists working near Rome made a shocking discovery. About 15 miles south of the city, inland, they found a mysterious lake. But this wasn't a natural lake. When they examined it carefully, something didn't add up. The shape was too geometric, too perfect. It covered nearly 80 acres, equivalent to 13 Roman Colosseums joined together. The real breakthrough came when they started digging. 2 miles from the Mediterranean coast, buried 6 feet underground in the mud and silt accumulated over 2,000 years, they found something extraordinary. Not just one boat, not 2 boats, 5 almost completely intact Roman vessels. These weren't small fishing boats either. These were massive cargo ships, the kind that could carry over 200 tons of goods across the entire Mediterranean. What shocked the archaeologists most was how well preserved these boats were. They could actually examine the construction details. One vessel was dated to the 2nd century AD, right when the Roman Empire was at absolute peak power. These boats had flat bottoms, unlike ocean-going vessels. That design was intentional. Flat bottoms allowed them to navigate shallow rivers. Rivers like the Tiber. But wait, there's more. Near the boats, researchers discovered the remains of massive walls, ancient Roman walls. As they excavated further, they realized these weren't random walls. Two separate structures curved back toward each other. And when they examined them closely, they found something absolutely brilliant. Running along the walls at a certain height was a white line. This wasn't paint or decoration. These were marine concretions, the mineral deposits that form on underwater structures. This entire area had once been underwater. This was a harbour. This was Portus. Now, here's where Roman engineering gets absolutely mind-blowing. Portus wasn't just a harbour, it was a complete logistical system. At the centre was that massive hexagonal basin you've heard me mention. Archaeological surveys and computer modelling revealed its true purpose. It wasn't just a pretty geometric shape. It was a genius solution to a real problem. Inside that hexagon, the Romans installed mooring rings, dozens of them. These rings could hold over 100 merchant vessels at the same time, all unloading simultaneously. Imagine the engineering required to design and build something like that. And it wasn't just empty space inside the basin. Surrounding the water were numbered docking stations, each corresponding to a specific berth. Ships would arrive, navigate to their assigned number, and dock. Then teams would unload the cargo. And what cargo it was. Remember those 150 to 300 million tons of grain? Much of it came through Portus. Surrounding the hexagonal basin were massive warehouse structures. These weren't small storage rooms. They were the largest grain warehouses in the entire Roman Empire. The Roman state needed to store months of grain as a buffer against bad harvests or supply disruptions. These structures could hold enough grain to feed Rome's entire population for extended periods. But here's the genius part that most people don't understand. Portus was more than 2 miles from the coast. The Mediterranean was too far away. So how did grain get from ships arriving at Portus to the river and then upriver to Rome? The answer was another remarkable engineering achievement. The Romans dug an artificial canal system. Not just one canal. Multiple canals connected Portus to the Tiber River. These canals weren't random ditches. They were engineered waterways capable of moving massive quantities of cargo. The smaller flat-bottomed vessels that archaeologists discovered weren't seagoing ships. They were specialized river craft built specifically for this canal and river network. They'd pick up cargo at Portus and carry it through the canals to the Tiber. Then the river would carry it the final 15 miles to Rome itself. Think about the complexity of this system. You have an ocean-going vessel arriving from Egypt or North Africa with hundreds of tons of grain. That ship offloads at Portus. The grain is stored in massive warehouses. Then, as the city needs it, smaller barges cart it through the canal system to the river. The river vessels navigate the Tiber, dealing with its shallows and currents, and finally deliver the grain to Rome's docks. All of this happened at scale that supplied 1 million people every single day. Now, finding a completely intact Roman cargo ship is extraordinarily rare. But off the coast of Spain, near the city of Alicante, 2 amateur divers named José and Antoine discovered something that, well, would help us understand Rome's entire supply network. They found the wreck of what became known as the Boufférère. When maritime archaeologists examined it, they realized it was carrying something very special. The ship's hold was filled with amphorae, those large clay storage jars the Romans used for everything from grain to oil to wine. But here's what made this shipwreck significant. Inside some of those jars, researchers discovered something unexpected. Fish bones and, something else, the residue of a liquid product. The cargo was garum, or fish sauce, as we call it today. Fish sauce was absolutely crucial to Roman cuisine. It was basically their version of soy sauce, adding flavour to bland food. The Mediterranean fisheries, particularly off the Spanish coast, were major producers. But the Boufférère was carrying something far more valuable than fish sauce. When archaeologists carefully examined the ship's hold, they discovered metal ingots hidden alongside the amphorae. 22 of them, each weighing 140 pounds. That's nearly 3 tons of raw metal. Examination revealed it wasn't gold or silver. It was lead. But here's what made it extraordinary. Every single ingot was stamped with Latin letters spelling out I. That stood for Imperator, the emperor himself. Archaeologists also found coins in the wreck dated to 66 AD, during the reign of Emperor Nero. Now, why would the emperor need a boatload of lead? The answer is in Roman history. In 64 AD, the Great Fire of Rome devastated the city. 2/3 of it burned to the ground. Emperor Nero saw an opportunity. He decided to rebuild Rome entirely in his own image, constructing the famous Domus Aurea, the Golden House. And what does massive rebuilding require? Raw materials, lots of them. Lead was essential for Roman plumbing systems. The water pipes, the aqueducts that supplied the city, the luxurious bathhouses that Roman elites enjoyed. All of it required lead. This shipwreck, likely sunk during a storm off the Spanish coast, was carrying imperial cargo destined for Rome. It was probably heading to Portus, where it would be offloaded and transported upriver. The ship never made it, but its discovery tells us something profound about how Rome worked. The empire wasn't just maintained by legions and slave labour. It was maintained by a sophisticated maritime network that moved raw materials, manufactured goods and foodstuffs across the entire Mediterranean at a scale that astounded the ancient world. If Portus was remarkable, what the Romans built in Caesarea Maritima in Judea was absolutely impossible. At least that's what engineers thought. Here's the situation. In this region, modern-day Israel, there were no natural harbours. The coastline was sandy, offering no protection from waves or storms. There were no rocky outcroppings to build on. The ground constantly threatened to shift from earthquakes, And yet, 2 decades before the birth of Jesus, Emperor Herod commissioned Roman engineers to build a grand offshore harbour here. For decades, modern investigators couldn't find evidence of it. Beverly Goodman, a National Geographic explorer, was determined to solve the mystery. She knew from historical records that the harbour existed, but locating it underwater was nearly impossible. The answer came from using advanced sonar technology. When researchers mapped the seafloor using modern scanning equipment, they discovered something astonishing. There were massive structures on the seafloor that appeared to be breakwaters. These weren't natural formations. Everything they examined revealed deliberate construction. One structure stretched hundreds of feet, another extended almost 1/3 of a mile. Together, these breakwaters enclosed a harbour that covered over 40 acres. This was the largest artificial harbour in the ancient world, built on nothing but sand. But here's the real engineering miracle. How do you build massive stone walls on shifting sand? It seems impossible. It should be impossible. But the Romans had discovered something revolutionary. They had developed hydraulic concrete, a material that hardens when exposed to water. The secret ingredient was volcanic ash called pozzolana, imported all the way from Mount Vesuvius in Italy. The Romans would create wooden frameworks called caissons and pour their concrete mixture into them. These wooden forms were then floated out and sunk into the sea. When the seawater hit the concrete, it hardened. They were essentially creating artificial bedrock on top of sand. It's the same principle engineers use today in marine construction. This technology, developed and perfected by Roman engineers, changed the course of construction history. Archaeological evidence suggests that Caesarea Maritima's grand harbour didn't survive long. Within a century of its construction, it collapsed. Sediment layers found in core samples indicate something cataclysmic, possibly a tsunami in 115 AD. The same sea that brought Rome prosperity eventually reclaimed its handiwork. Yet even in destruction, the harbour's remains tell a story. For over 1,000 years, Rome controlled the Mediterranean like no other power before or after. They didn't just build ships. They engineered the entire maritime infrastructure that made empire possible. From Portus's grain warehouses to Caesarea's impossible harbour, Roman engineers transformed the Mediterranean into a highway of commerce and power. It wasn't until 1,000 years later that Portugal and Spain came anywhere close to matching Rome's naval dominance. The lesson here is profound. Empires aren't built by swords alone. They're built by infrastructure, logistics, and engineering genius. Rome understood that controlling the sea meant controlling the world. The Romans proved that true power comes from understanding how to move resources, people, and ideas across vast distances. They built an empire beneath the waves that we're only now beginning to fully understand. If you enjoyed exploring these hidden chapters of history, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share this with fellow history enthusiasts. Drop a comment telling us which Roman engineering achievement amazed you most. And if you want to dive deeper into incredible historical discoveries that mainstream documentaries overlook, you know where to find us. Untold Realms, where history goes deep. Gap 1s. Enjoyed the journey? Subscribe for more hidden history. Gap 0.5s. Dynamic subscribe animation appears on screen, pulsing in sync with the music. Gap 0.5s. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next Untold realm.